설명하는데 일단 알아야 되는 중요한 부분이다라고 생각하고 있기 때문이고요. 그리고 또 특히 최고의 그런 베스트 인 클래스 승계 계획의 접근법에서의 3단계에 대해서 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 다음에 우선 인재 관리에 대해서 말씀드리겠습니다. 여러분들께서도 아마 인재가 갈수록 희소해지고 있다는 데 있어서는 다 의견을 같이 할 것으로 알고 있습니다. 이것은 단지 특정한 시장뿐만 아니라 모든 전국적으로 다양한 국가에서 나타나고 있는 현상입니다. 인재라는 것은, 인재의 희소성이라는 것은 우리의 클라이언트 고객사들에게서도 마찬가지 어려운 난관 과제인데요. 여러분들 중에서는 인재를 확보하는 것이 어렵지 않을 것이다라고 생각하는 분야에서도 다 마찬가지로 직면하고 있는 현실입니다. 잘 아시겠지만 크라이슬러든 GM, 포드 이러한 자동차 제조 업체들은 지난 몇 년 동안에 그런 감원을 많이 했고 조직의 규모를 줄여 나갔는데 여기에서 중요한 것은 GM이나 포드, 크라이슬러 다 전체적으로 인적 자원의 수를 줄이고 또한 직업의 수를 줄이고 있는데 동시에 상당히 많은 채용도 하고 있습니다. 그러니까 일자리가 줄어들고 그리고 또 사람들, 그러니까 인적 인력을 줄이고 있는데 비즈니스에서 필수적인 자리에 대한 채용은 계속해서 하고 있거든요. 그런데 그 과정에서 필요한 적절한 인재들, 적절한 스킬을 갖고 있는 사람들을 찾고 채용하는 것이 그 어느 때보다도 힘들다고 합니다. 그래서 전혀 예상치 못했던 분야에서도 인재를 확보하는 것이 상당히 어렵다고 알려져 있고요. 글로벌 단위에서 보면 모든 기업들에게 해당 사항이 있다라고 봅니다. 그렇다면 인재를 관리를 하고 채용하는 것이 왜 이렇게 어려울까요? 인구학적인 특징들을 일단 들 수 있겠습니다. 인구학이 바로 우리의 인재의 수요 및 공급에 영향을 미치는데 보면 필요한 적절한 스킬을 갖고 있는 인재의 공급이 수요를 따라오지 못하고 있습니다. 베이비붐 세대가 고령화되면서 퇴직을 하고 또 인력시장에서 떠나면서 정말로 전체적으로 스킬과 경험이 많은 조직에 있어서 빠져나가는 현상으로 이어질 것으로 보고 있습니다. 또한 인구학적으로도 말씀드릴 수 있는 것
has talent management implications. Workers also have different types of attitudes and expectations today. Much has been written about Generation Y, or the millennials, and the new attitudes and values and expectations that they bring to the workplace. And this is true in the U.S. It's also true in other countries. Just this last week in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about Japanese youth today and the new attitudes and different types of work ethic and different expectations that they are bringing to the workplace. Now, as the workforce diversifies and disperses, this brings new flexible schedules, telework arrangements, and other technology-enabled work arrangements. And leaders, business leaders, organizational leaders have to find new ways to cultivate culture and organizational identity. Finally, work itself is changing. In all organizations, work is changing. New technology is applied, jobs become more highly skilled, and upskilling of jobs. And also, this new technology creates different workplace boundaries. It basically has changed the nature of work and when, where, and how work gets done. All of this leads to new types of talent management requirements. Now, we think this is a huge change. We think that this is a major change which is just starting to develop, and we think this has major implications on society and on businesses around the world. And this requires a new and very comprehensive and integrated approach to talent management. This chart depicts our overall talent management perspective. I do not have time today to describe this in detail, but a couple points I want to emphasize. Fundamental to this is that we think the approach to talent management has to start with a very clear understanding of what is your business strategy. What is your specific business strategy, and what are the implications in terms of people strategy and the types of skills and competencies and the particular workforce segments who are most significant to your marketplace value proposition. Once you do that and rather rigorously apply workforce planning techniques to the specific types of skills and competencies and segments that you have, only then can you move forward to design the individual jobs and roles and career paths and the supporting HR programs. And the supporting HR programs include how do you recruit people? How do you onboard them? How do you manage their performance? What types of rewards do you provide for them? And how do you do succession planning? Now, today, of course, the topic of today's session is to focus on succession planning, but we think it's important that that be viewed within the context, the broader context of an overall integrated talent management strategy. So why is succession planning so important by itself? Well, first, it's a big problem. There's a significant shortage of executive talent available today, in particular those who have global skills, experiences, and are willing to, are available for global deployment. I read a recent survey in which 2/3 of surveyed companies reported that they were experiencing a shortage of qualified leadership either today or they anticipate within the next 12 months that they will have this type of leadership shortage to the extent that it is already negatively impacting their organizational performance. So this is not a distant or theoretical problem. Another survey by the National Association of Corporate Directors, rather interesting disconnect. They asked CEOs, how confident are you that you have the right leadership team in place with the right skills? And 2/3 of CEOs said we have a high level of confidence that we have the right team in place. Conversely, they asked boards of directors how comfortable they were, and only 27% said they had the same level of confidence. And as you know, boards are becoming increasingly aware of, concerned about, and active with succession planning themselves, so that's significant. So on one hand, there's a problem. On the other hand, succession planning done right offers significant value. It overcomes the shortage of ready-now leaders. It enables companies to methodically and intentionally develop individuals with the right types of experiences, including global experience. It creates an environment for long-term leadership development programs. It avoids the reactive crisis-type situations that we all too often see related to succession planning. And it enables organizations to respond smoothly in chaotic, unanticipated, and challenging times such as what we're experiencing today. So with that, what is best-in-class succession planning? Well, first, let me spend just a moment on why the traditional approach to succession planning perhaps has not been very successful. Our perspective, our experience is that all too often organizations focus only on the senior-most executive leadership team. Often organizations are very siloed in how they approach succession planning. They focus on isolated geographies or countries. They focus on isolated business units. And they don't focus holistically. They also all too often apply sort of generic, off-the-shelf, one-size-fits-all leadership development programs to develop their leadership team. And finally, more often than not, as I alluded to earlier, we see this done in sort of an emergency and reactive fashion rather than a well-thought-out, proactive fashion. Now, conversely, succession planning done right focuses not just on the senior leadership team, but on critical roles across the organization. It's very proactive in developing a talent bench, and it does so by focusing on customized leadership individual development plans that incorporate a blended learning approach, and I'll talk about each of these in just a moment. In our experience, world-class companies that do this well tend, one way or the other, to focus on three basic issues. First, organizations which we think are world-class don't just focus on the senior-most executive leadership team, but focus on what we call critical workforce segments. Now, critical workforce segments are not just the C-suite. It could be employees down at the very bottom of the organization. It's employees who are responsible for a disproportionately large share of your value proposition, of your market proposition. Now, depending on your particular business, this could be groups of very specialized engineers. If you're in a manufacturing environment, it might be particular technicians with specialized skills. It might be researchers. It might be marketing specialists. It could be sales segments within your organization and build your succession planning programs intentionally around them. So having defined these critical workforce segments and then applied some of the rigorous workforce planning that I described earlier to model out the supply and demand under various economic scenarios, you should then work to build the right talent bench, a supply of future leaders who have the right mix of talent and experiences to support your strategic objectives. Define the roles, formalize the program, formalize the plans, think and act with a long-term perspective so that you build this bench across business units and across geographies. You establish a culture within your leadership team of developing future leaders, and you actually build it into goals of your current leaders. And you think about, proceed with the concept of creating successors to successors. It's sort of like playing chess. You think several moves out, not just about the next immediate round of succession. So it's very much a long-term perspective. So how do you do that? Well, we believe that it requires creation of customized, accelerated development programs. Now this is, these leadership development programs or accelerated development programs are part of your broader leadership development programs. They're part of your broader talent management programs. It's not just focused on those at the top of the organization, and organizations that do this seem to believe that these abilities can be developed, and indeed our experiences that great leaders themselves thrive on these experiences and thrive on and relish and flourish under these developmental opportunities. They in turn inspire and uplift the entire organization, so it can have a very positive effect on organizational outcome performance. On a more granular level, I hope you can read this, on a more granular level, as I said earlier, start with business strategy. You start by considering the types, what you need for your business. You also you consider very carefully what the individual employees need and want and what motivates them, and you can thereby do a bit of a gap analysis, see where your gaps are, out of which you can create tailored, blended, comprehensive, and integrated accelerated development plans. Now, elements of those plans can include rotational programs, stretch assignments, shadowing, on-the-job training, including apprenticeship type programs, which, by the way, you can look to a lot of Japanese business around the globe and how they relied heavily on this apprentice type model. International assignments, mentoring and coaching, networks and communities of practice, and formal learning programs as well. So there's a lot of elements that can be put in place for individuals, but all of that then has to be supported by your other people management programs or HR program elements in an aligned fashion. So your performance management processes, your reward system, your succession tracking systems all have to be aligned with these program elements in a supportive fashion. And then finally, you have to measure, monitor, and report all of this on an ongoing basis. And as I mentioned earlier, this should have significant senior level visibility, but it should also have visibility increasingly with the board of directors if applicable. Our experience is that organizations that that do this well tend to share some common practices. They have strong executive support and involvement. They have started by focusing on what are the specific competencies and skills that we need in our particular business as we move forward as part of our strategy. It targets leaders up and down the organization, in particular in these critical workforce segments. As it's deployed globally, these programs are done in a very sensitive fashion, sensitive to cultural differences, language differences, developmental differences, etc. And as I mentioned earlier, all of this is part of a broader talent management and learning development program. So in summary, I'm going to close by saying best-in-class succession planning helps create a talent bench of individuals who have the type of experience and training and background that is helpful not just in executive roles but across the organization, and that this is done on a long-term, proactive, sustained basis. I look forward to questions later. Thank you.
대단히 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your presentation. For business succession, there needs to be good prior planning. And as part of this planning, there are 3 components that should be fulfilled. 1, from the entire business or entire company perspective, there should be role clarification. Second, from the entire business perspective, there should be global talents that are identified. And thirdly, competency development to realize these roles is important. I think that was the gist of the presentation that was just given. Now we'll listen to the second presentation, which will be on the succession management for global companies. Mr. Clifford Taylor will give the presentation. Mr. Clifford Taylor is the Human Resources Director in charge of Asia and Pacific region at Eli Lilly and Company. Your presentation, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I think you will hear a number of things in my discussion today which are very similar to what you just heard from Richard, but I hope nonetheless that the comments will be additive rather than repetitive. Before I get into this, I'd like to share with you a little bit about the company that I've worked for the last 19 years, Eli Lilly. We may not be the best known company. I'll just allow me 30 seconds. Our business is in pharmaceuticals. We have a particular focus on these 4 therapeutic areas in our research activities, in which we spend about 21% of all of our sales, so heavily research focused. We are a very innovation driven company. That's what we focus on. Here are some of the innovations. Almost 90 years ago, we were the first company to commercialize insulin for diabetes. We were the first company to use rDNA technology in producing a product called human insulin. Vancomycin, which is a very old anti-infective, is still a gold standard today. Prozac and Zyprexa are much more recent times. You may have heard of these products in our portfolio. Perhaps you've been prescribed them in the countries you come from. And last of all, this is the growing list of all of our customers. We used to call just on physicians and pharmacists, and now the healthcare environment in every country has become much more complex for us, and so we have to call on many more customers. This, of course, in turn leads to implications for our own succession management and leadership development. If I may, I'd like to have your indulgence, because I was very inspired this morning with the discussion with Jack Welch, even though he was talking from thousands of miles away. And so it reminded me of one of his books, Winning the Answers. And in this book, there is a description of the real job of HR. And I think there are a number of HR people in here. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to read a few lines from it, because I think it really describes a lot of what we're about. Point blank, HR should be every single company's killer application. What could possibly be more important than who gets hired, developed, promoted, or moved out of the door? After all, business is a game, and as with all games, the team that puts the best people on the field and gets them playing together wins. It's that simple. I think a very compelling argument for the discussion that we're having in this session today. There's much more in that, by the way, than what I just quoted, but that's just a flavor of it. Let me then turn to the agenda for this discussion. Why we even do succession management. I won't dwell on this because I think Richard's done a good job of that. I'll spend more time on the second element, which is the key components that we use at Eli Lilly and how we use some of them. Then a little bit about coaching leaders on the discussions and feedback following that, and then how we use metrics to improve our performance, because at the end of all this, there is a result that we're looking for, something that we need to do, which is improve our leadership pipeline and to be able to staff positions. So let's start with the business case. Why is it important? It matters. Those of you who were here for the session before the break will have heard Michael Vavakis from HP talk about the importance of leaders and why it's important. We need to plan for the succession for key positions, and I agree totally with what Richard said. It's not just the senior executives. There are many key positions upon which we rely, and our goal in all of this, the last bullet point, is extremely hard to do, which is to put the right person in the right position at the right time. It sounds so easy and trips off the tongue, but it's extremely hard to pull off. So why is it such a hot topic? I think you've heard most of these points. Most of my references here actually come from the Corporate Leadership Council, where we've done a lot of some work with them, so I won't refer to that much more, but you can see all the elements why companies see leadership development and succession management as being critically important HR priorities. This slide is not meant to be a direct disagreement or argument with my fellow speakers this afternoon, because there is a case for building as well as for buying, but the focus of my discussion this afternoon is for the internal building of talent, and there are clear business reasons why you would want to try and do that. You avoid so many costs and you gain a lot of productivity. In fact, our company's employment philosophy is that if we earn the trust and loyalty and commitment of our employees over time, that will in fact lead to superior performance and productivity. So you can see some of the examples here of why it's a good plan to try and develop leaders from inside. As I said, it's extremely hard to do, so it's not the only game in town. Here is another piece of analysis which correlates the total shareholder return with bottom tier versus top tier leadership quality, which was a 3-year return on investment study with the Corporate Leadership Council. And then the last point is, what if it goes wrong? I'm sure many of you who either run organizations or help run organizations can relate to at least one of the points on this slide. When it goes wrong, you have all kinds of challenges in that people maybe are not ready, they might be demotivated because they're unclear where they stand, they may even be unaware of their potential until you have that exit interview when you say, but didn't you know we had you on the list to be the next general manager? And it's too late at that point. And so there are many reasons why this is an important endeavor. So let me turn then to some of the components that we use in Eli Lilly. We see this as an integrated talent management process, as I believe all large companies do. I'm not going to look at every element that's on this slide. This slide is intended to show the integrated nature of what we do. I will talk about the bits that are highlighted in the blue and the red in the middle, and also a bit about the talent identification tool, because I think we found that to be one of the most critical elements of the process to identify the people who you want to grow and develop. So if we start in the middle, we use these inputs on the left-hand side. I'll talk later about the ID tool. We ask every employee to maintain an e-resume, which is accessible anywhere in the world for those who have access, their development plan, and then that relates to the talent. And then for the position, we establish what is the position description, and of course that changes a lot. It will be different today for someone who's working in global treasury than it was 12 months ago, I imagine, if we were having to fill that position. Also look at the experience map, what's important in terms of experiences for an individual to have prior to undertaking a position, and what competencies. So those two elements of assessment take place before the meeting even begins or the discussion begins. Then, in succession planning, you think about what candidates should be considered for key position openings. And here, I find that we go back and forth between who are candidates for a certain position and then talking about a specific individual and what the plans are for that individual. we end up coming out of this, we'll come out to what the outputs are. But you can see the questions that we ask around the talent and around the positions. And I'll go into these in a little more depth in a minute. But let me talk about talent. High performance is a prerequisite. It is not the eligibility ticket for being considered a high potential. So in other words, all high potentials should be high performers, but not all high performers will be high potentials. Only a number of those are going to be. So the process that we use helps you look at more than that. How do we do it? Well, the vertical axis here shows the performance dimension over time and across different jobs. And then across the bottom, you can see that we look at something called learning agility. Not our own invention, but it came from the Center for Creative Research, which many of you may be familiar with, and looks at about 12 different dimensions. I'll mention one or two. One of them is just curiosity. How interested and curious is an individual at looking into new and different situations, trying new and different ideas, or do they just rely on the tried and tested ideas, for example? So there are about 12 of those dimensions which we would rate a talent in a group setting using the same process, and then by doing that you have some kind of comparability. And then those who score highly on both dimensions we would consider to have the highest potential. But that's not the end of the story, because there are those barriers that can creep in. There may be someone who is very aloof, who doesn't really like working with people, or as someone said earlier on in a presentation that I saw, maybe leaves dead bodies along the way in the process of getting results. And so it's important to identify those barriers, because those need to be overcome before the potential can be realized. So that's the theory, and we've translated that into a tool, a discussion tool. So you then end up with at least two different types of talent. You think about the high professionals, so people who are strong performers within their function, perhaps within their role, who you want to keep motivated, and they might be top performers year after year. It's usually easier to identify these people. It's much harder to identify the people on the right for many, many reasons. But if you consider the number of people who have tried different things and been successful, maybe in the public world, there may be politicians, there may be entertainers, sports people who've turned their hands to different things and been successful. It gives you some idea of what learning agility looks like. And then a demonstrated willingness and an ability to learn skills, new skills, in order to perform. So putting people into stretch assignments, into assignments that take them beyond their comfort zone, so that they have to do something different to be successful. And I've listed some of what those things might be. So that gets you into the discussion around what type of talent you're talking about, the high potentials. Let's now turn and look at the positions. I'm sorry, this is then the resume. There's a list of things that we ask employees to keep on their personal resume on a global database, and you can see some of the elements on here. For us, we look at key positions and we define them either because they have a global reach in some way, or because the vacancy would cause some disruption. And as Richard said, they need not necessarily all be executive positions. We have one individual who I've known for many, many years who works in our corporate tax department, and through his skill, we have probably saved more money through his actions and expertise than any other single individual in the company. So I hope that we have a good succession plan for when he takes a well-earned retirement. Now, the other part of this, as I mentioned, and I will reinforce, this is constantly changing. We do live in very dynamic times. As I showed you earlier, our particular customer base is changing and expanding constantly, and so you need to be prepared to review and revise what the expectations are from any given position at a given time. So if we then look at the outputs of our succession management process, in order for a global process to have some meaning, there needs to be some calibration, so that in one country versus another country, or in one function to another function, there is some similarity in the way that talent is being assessed, so that that pool of talent can be used and deployed and developed on a global basis. That's, again, not easy to do, but requires focused effort and attention, which in our company it certainly does. I'll come back to that. It can lead to some staffing decisions. Perhaps one of the most important things is the talent pipeline. So in order to invest the scarce resources that we all have in terms of dollars for training programs, or importantly, those key experiences, you need to identify who the key people are that you want to give to those. Retention lists and metrics are other key outputs. I mentioned we have a global system. The global system we have is by no means a rocket science. It's a web-based tool, and the beauty of it is that we only use the data that's in that system, and hence we put all the data in that system, which means that anyone with access can really query that database on a real-time basis. I'll give you one example. In the last few months, we had an unexpected vacancy in Russia for our sales director. And I went into the database, did a query on Russian speakers, and we turned up someone in France who was a talent and France knew about, but we were able within 3 or 4 days to start having discussions. So that really helps us, having that kind of a tool, and over the years everybody has come to rely on that. In terms of senior management support, the one point on here that may be of interest is this chief executive review down here. The pointer's not working, but our chief executive once a year insists on each function presenting for a full day their talent pipeline and plans for building the organization, with a focus on the elements that I've just discussed. So you can imagine that that drives the attention through the organization, which is a great benefit. I won't dwell on this slide. It's important for us. We want to make sure that our leaders then do go back to individual employees and give them feedback from this succession process, where they stand and what their development goals are and what their opportunities are. And that's a very, very important process. As I mentioned earlier, if we don't do that, someone else outside the company probably is talking to them about their career. In terms of metrics, we have system-generated metrics which show us things like this, which is how many plans we have, how many have a projected vacancy, and so on. We want to ensure that our senior leaders of the future have experiences outside of their home country, outside of their home function, that we have a certain percentage of women and minorities on our senior management committee, and so we track those metrics also within the system. And let's see, I think this is my next to last slide. So what are the results for us? I'm pleased to say that we have an Indian, and these are all people that have been with the company a long time, have been developed. We have an Indian running our Indian business. We have a Thai running our Thai business, an Indonesian running our Indonesian business. We also have a Filipino who used to run our Filipino business and then ran our Asia business, is now running our biggest affiliate, which is in Japan. And so within Asia, we've had those successes. We've just had a Korean running our Korean business who's now moving on to an assignment in our corporate center, which we're very, very excited about. And so it's only by the consistent application of these tools that you get results like that. It's not perfect, nothing is perfect, but we constantly strive to improve. I won't go through the summary, but rather thank you for your attention and look forward to any dialogue that we may have. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. You gave a presentation on succession management for global companies, and you talked about the need for integrated system, and there should be talent position assessment in this integrated system. And the core of the presentation is that succession planning should be well prepared, and for these to be carried out properly, there should be some metrics or measuring system that should be adopted. Next is our last presenter. It's Anna Dutra. Anna Dutra is the CEO of Korn Ferry International and has been involved in leadership and talent consulting.
good afternoon. Can you hear me there in the back? Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And before I even start, I'd like to talk a little bit about the work that we do at Korn Ferry and how we can bring to bear the whole discussion about build versus buy, as well as our experience with clients, helping them to build succession planning processes, to build the model, and in addition to that, the amount of research that we do through our companies in the consulting group that will help us to show you best practices and trends in succession planning. Most of the research that we do is actually generated by client issues worldwide. And client issues start with either what they are trying to accomplish through their strategy, as well as what challenges, what barriers they're seeing as they grow their businesses in several different countries. One of the key issues that we observed, what about this? Oops. Much better. Okay, I need my presentation up there.
어디서 컨트롤 하나요? 이 화면이 제대로 지금 안 나오고 있는데.
How can we control the screen?
Okay, so we're back on track here. So one of the key issues that we observe and one of the key types of questions that arise through clients in regards to succession planning is, first of all, for global companies, how centralized or decentralized should the succession planning model and process be? So where should decisions be made? Given that this is such a critical process for human capital, for building the leadership of the future in companies, how standardized should this process be? And then you start a very interesting discussion between global HR groups, corporate HR groups, and the field businesses and the field leadership, in which in one case the global HR groups say, you know, we need to have the same process, we need to have the same model throughout the organization so that we're being consistent. On the other hand, you have the local business leaders, you have the local HR teams saying, well, but our country is different. Talent here is different. Our culture is different. So the first thing that I'll invite you to think about is really, how do we define global? How do you define global in your companies? Are we talking about a conglomerate of domestic organizations that are managed by a holding? Or are we talking about a business that uses resources worldwide, that uses the best resources, whatever they are, independent of what nationality they come from? So we started to work with clients on that, and we found a very clear trend over the years. So you had in the past, most companies and HR groups dominated by what I'll call the ethnocentric model. So that's when you take the nationals from the country that are the headquarters of the company. So think about Shell in the old days. Think about Cemex, the largest cement producer, Mexican company. Think about LG 5 years ago. And you would spread that leadership throughout the globe, because the argument would be that then we can proliferate and nurture and strengthen our corporate culture. Well, the problem with that is that you're sending then a clear message to talent in different countries that there is a glass ceiling for them. At some point, their career stops because the nationals of the headquarters of the company are going to take that position. The other end of the spectrum is the polycentric model, in which basically the subsidiaries are primarily staffed by the locals. Well, we have a couple of issues here. First of all, you have a harder time really sustaining and nurturing the company culture. And second, you are probably creating silos in which people only know how to operate in their own countries and they're not transferred around. Well, the model that we'll defend, and that's what we have been seeing as best practices, is what we'll call the geocentric model, in which the skill of the person is what matters. When you look at the talent pipeline, and at the end of the day, that's what succession planning is all about. We should not be looking at passports. We should be looking at who are the right people for the jobs, who are the highest potential in the organizations. So when we look at truly global companies and the best ones in managing talent, the first thing that we find is that there is a corporate culture that overrides geographical differences. Does that mean that we're not going to be sensitive to national cultures? Of course not. But at the end of the day, if a culture is, for the company, is nimble, is aggressive, is non-bureaucratic, is collaborative, you should nurture a culture that's nimble, aggressive, collaborative in each and every country that you operate. The other thing is that you have to pick a culture that supports the strategy and the value proposition of the company. And for global companies that have global clients, you don't want to send different messages by having different cultures in different countries. We talked about having the right skills, and I know both Richard and Clifford mentioned that. Well, you cannot truly understand what the right skills are if you don't build the right competency model for your company. So once you understand what the strategy of the company is, being very clear on what competencies this company needs to develop to be successful and support that strategy and execute on that strategy is going to be key. For businesses that are growing globally, implementing HR systems consistently across all regionals is critical. And the price paid for not doing that is that very quickly people start to realize, your workforce starts to realize that there are different performance criteria per region, that there are different training systems per region, that there are different recruiting policies per region, and then you are in trouble if you're truly a global company. Is that easy to do? It is not. In particular for companies that grow through multiple acquisitions, integrating those companies worldwide and making sure that they're all running under a similar HR platform is not easy, but that's what best practices companies do, and that's what distinguishes them from their competition. And then finally, seeking and hiring the best talent independently of their passport. So the message here is identify high potentials globally and develop high potentials globally. But the question now is, how do you define high potentials, right? And Cliff mentioned the work that started to be done at CCL a while ago, and that we took further a number of steps on learning agility. And let me tell you a little bit about what we consider and what we would like you to consider as you think about defining, identifying, developing, and retaining right potentials in your organization so that they can be part of that succession planning, that succession pipeline. So my first question is, how do you define it? Do you define it the same way in all the regions of the organization, throughout all the business lines, throughout all the functions? How consistently and effectively is that definition applied? So two steps here. One is to define, and the second one is to execute on the definition. And then, how do you view potential by region? Let me tell you a little bit about some of our most recent research findings. And what got us intrigued was exactly the questions that so many of our clients were asking about, are high potentials different in regions of the world? And I would love to take you through the entire study, in which we actually took a group of 2,500 high potentials and high performers in organizations, and we did cuts. We did cuts by gender, we did cuts by age, and we did cuts by geography. The bottom line is that we did not find a lot of difference, and we're going to get to why. But basically, a summary of the findings is, first of all, performance is highly overused as a criteria for potential. So be very careful, and I'll go back to, I have a similar slide, Cliff, to a slide that you showed that given a research around hundreds and hundreds of high performers and high potentials following their careers throughout the years, what we observed is that over 2/3 of employees who performed very well in particular functions were not high potentials. How many times do you have in your businesses situations in which you say, you know what? This person was a great salesperson, and then we made him or her a manager, and we got a mediocre manager when we had a great senior person. Or let's take it one level up in the organization. You take somebody who is a great leader in a turnaround situation. You put that person on a talent pipeline. You have now a need for a growth leader in a new venture, and that leader does not perform. What does that mean? That means that what took that person to a particular level of performance not necessarily is a clear indication that that particular individual is going to perform in different positions, because you are taking performance as an indicator of potential. So what we found was that learning agility is a much better predictor of potential than intelligence or than past performance. And then most managers overrate both performance and potential. This is basically the same chart that you showed, in which we found for a fact that not necessarily all high performers are high potentials. But now let's step back and say, so how do we define high potentials if that's what we're really, really looking for in our succession planning? So if you take only the top part of this equation, we have raw materials, right? So think about how people are wired. Some people are naturally very curious. Some people crave change. Some people are very good at reading people and being self-aware. So they know how to make use of a network that not necessarily reports to them. Some people are very results-oriented and results-focused. So that's how you're wired. Individuals are born like that. Others you can develop. But then you need experience, because otherwise you could take somebody out of college that is wired that way, put that person in a leadership position, and that person would succeed, which is not true. So there's an experience coefficient there, which makes throughout the succession planning so vital that we give individuals the right types of experiences throughout their career. In fact, one of the things that we found in our research is that companies that accelerate too much their high potentials, they end up killing them by giving them jobs that are too far above the level that they're able to perform at a certain period in time. So if you take raw materials plus experiences and you multiply that by learning agility, which I'm going to show you the measurements and how we go about measuring and classifying them, but it's basically your people agility, your change agility, your results agility, and your change agility. You have potential. There's only one problem. If you decide too early that a person is a high potential without seeing consistent behavior throughout time, you may have been too fast. And that goes back to a discussion that actually happened this morning, which was around, when do you tell people, right? Performance, you always tell. Performance is a fact. You have past data, you inform them, you say, here's where you are from a performance perspective. Potential, you need to see sustained high performance over time. So basically, take the recipe of the above part of the chart and then multiply by achieving results a number of times, and there you go. There you have your high potential. Now, how do you measure learning agility, which is key? And Clifford started to talk about that in his presentation. So basically, we found 4 factors that drive learning agility. Each one of those factors has 27 dimensions that not only we measure, but we also relate to the competency model that the company should have and to the succession planning process and model that needs to be put in place. But what we're looking at in terms of 4 factors is, first of all, a person's mental agility. And that is basically your critical thinker. Is somebody who is able to take experiences from the past and translate what he or she learned into current and new situations. It's somebody who is very, very curious about how can I apply this particular challenge in my next job, or what can I learn from David or from Clifford that will enable me to make parallels between situations. The second one is people agility. And people agility, even though on the chart you only have know themselves, is how self-aware a person is, but in addition to that, how good is that person in figuring it out? Basically, in reading other people and learning how to very quickly engage them. So think about a very learning agile person is somebody who is put in a new situation and very quickly understands how to perform, very quickly understands how to prioritize opportunities, what needs to be done, who are my key stakeholders and influencers, how do I get them to work with me, and how do I present myself. These are also people who like to experiment. And they not only crave change, but because they are very self-aware, the fact that they like to experiment a lot does not allow them to be perceived like a loose person who is always changing direction, because that person is also good at understanding how much change others can take. And then finally, this would not work if this individual was not focused on results. So this is a person who, in addition to being a critical thinker, being self-aware and knowing others, liking to experiment, thriving in change, having a very, very high tolerance for ambiguity, is very results driven. If we had more time here, I would actually show to you what happens when you do not have one of the components of learning agility, and what happens to that person in the succession planning pipeline and process. So, this is not just about knowing how to measure learning agility, but we also need now to understand how do we plot all these people, all these leaders in the succession planning pipeline. First of all, let me make something clear. Your population of strategic stars, so the people who are high performers as well as very high potentials, is typically 2 to 3% of your entire workforce, your entire population. So they're not easy to find. When you find them, make sure you develop and retain them. But the people we were talking about who are, for example, very high performers, but are not high potentials in the future, those are people who we also want to retain. They may be incredibly valued experts in a particular function or in a particular activity. The bottom line is that there is a distribution, and there is a distribution that is different for every company that you want to achieve and be very clear in your succession planning process. So, for example, there are companies that, depending in what stage of maturity of their life cycle as a company they are going to need a higher number of strategic stars. There are other companies in more mature businesses that are going to have a higher percentage of their professionals in the adaptable high professional. So again, even though we have a framework and we have the metrics and we have the best practices, at the end of the day, it is a combination of your strategy, the industry you're in the phase in the life cycle you're in your company, that's going to determine what is your ideal distribution in terms of your population in this succession planning model. But you do need to have it for every level in the organization, because otherwise you get stuck with the problem that both Cliff and Richard brought up, which is you take care of the top layer, but this is a cascading process and you need to be thinking 5 years ahead. When you're thinking about a global organization, you need to factor in every geography, every function, every business unit. So again, think about a cascading process in which you are going to look at the entire population from a corporate perspective, and then you are going to have small 9 boxes per geography and per business line and per product line. Let's now take this to Korean, and here are some of the questions that Korea companies need to start asking themselves in order to really become global companies, and recognizing that some of you are already there, right? So the first one is, what makes a leader successful in an international business? Is it the same set of competencies from an organization perspective that made the company successful in Korea or in Asia, or are we looking now at a slightly different set of competencies? How are my leaders different from successful leaders in the global business? So again, looking at best practices, looking at benchmarking figures, looking at what's making leaders successful in other parts of the world can be really, really helpful. How are you now more likely to identify which leaders will be successful in international postings? Let me tell you about, we heard from the gentleman from Novartis this morning. And one of the things that Novartis got really, really good at using this model is in the predictability of high potentials in the future. Organizations are a learning body as well, so we're talking about learning agility from an individual perspective. But if you translate that up to the organizational level, the more you practice identifying high potentials and working with them, the better your predictability of high potentials in the future is going to be. And to Cliff's point, just imagine how much that can create in terms of value, faster for the organization, and in terms of cost savings and disruption, because you're not going to lose these people in the future, right? What do I need to develop or coach my leaders to compete outside of Korea? And then the reverse side of the coin is, how do I assess expats coming into Korea, and how do I know how to help them fit the organization? So one point here is that you want to understand 3 things in this last question to make this work. First of all, you want to be very clear on the role of the expat, on the mission of the expat. Is that person being brought in to be a change agent for the company, or is that executive being brought in to reinforce the existing culture? The second point to take into account is how much change is going to be required for the company to take the next step. And then the third one is, from a cultural perspective, how much change can that company take? Is that a change-hungry company or a change-averse company? So when you put all those 3 together, then now you can be clear on what new and existing executives can accomplish throughout this pipeline. So the bottom line is, the number 1 way to become a truly global company is, first of all, align the leadership requirements with the organizational strategy. And I'll actually take this one step further and say it's not just the strategy. It is the value proposition under the strategy. Because if you have a growth strategy, a global growth strategy that is based on being a product or a service innovator, your competency model is going to look very different than another company in the same industry that has a growth strategy being based on being operational excellent. Your target segments, your target customer segments are going to be different. Your competency model is going to be very, very different. So we need clarity on that. Evaluate executives both on performance and potential, and evaluate them globally under the same criteria. Otherwise, people figure out very quickly how the criteria are different and where they can move faster, and you're going to lose some of your high performers. and identify and develop the high performers based on their strengths and weaknesses. So how do you do that? You need to have a very powerful, science-based and consistent assessment system worldwide. And that's the one message is, if anything, pick your assessment model and use it worldwide and build your own database. We work with, as I mentioned to you, because of our experience in search and as well as with clients in the consulting group, we built a database that has over 1.3 professionals that have been assessed. What that enables us to do is to very clearly, first of all, have norms by country, by function, by type of industry, by position. But ultimately, you want to combine that with developing your own norms in your organization. There are metals and mining companies that are growing so fast and are so aggressive in the marketplace that when we look at their executives, I'd rather compare with a U.S. Silicon Valley company because of their growth pattern, of their culture, of their profiles. You want to look at a few different things. You want to look at interpersonal styles. You want to measure learning agility and emotional competencies. You want to look at operating styles. And you want to look at how people think and make decisions. Again, if we had more time, I would be happy to take you through the science of doing those assessments on a very, very science-based basis. But what I'd like to do, since I think I'm past my time here, is I will ask my colleagues to just stand up for 1 minute, and if you have questions about that, go to them, but would love to share the research. So the Korn Ferry folks, if you can just stand up, they will answer all your questions in the break. So thank you very much. But the bottom line is that as counterintuitive as that might seem, but I am sure that some of you in the HR group, in particular those of you who are charged with the very, very challenging task of implementing HR systems consistently across the organization, what we found out is that, again, a high potential is a high potential with the same characteristics. High learning agility, 4 factors: people, change, and results worldwide, and there are very, very little differences by gender and by geography. So thank you very much, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. For globalization of a company, there should be a global HR system, a correct understanding of the system, and in particular, there should be good succession planning. I think that was the emphasis in the last presentation, and particularly the ability to grow high potential talents. Fostering high potential talents, a program is needed for this, and what is most important for such a program is determining the learning agility of the talents. And for Korean companies to be globalized, there should be intercultural competency, and there should be genuine preparations to become a globalized company. So those are some points mentioned in the last presentation. We've now listened to all the 3 presentations, and now we will listen to discussion by a Korean participant. From POSCO, the Senior Executive Vice President, Mr. Jong Tae-che, will give the discussion. Because I started in a rush, I didn't even introduce myself, so I apologize for that. I am a professor of College of Business Administration at Seoul National University. My name is Oh Soo Park. I apologize for the late introduction. Then Mr. Jong Tae-che, please. Adjust the volume of the microphone on the left. As introduced, I'm in charge of innovation, HR, and training at POSCO. I would first of all like to thank the three presenters for good presentations. Let me introduce POSCO very briefly. Of course, POSCO also is focused on selecting talents, evaluating them, training them, and also coming up with a succession system. But what I felt in the process of managing my company is that succession is a very difficult matter. Having proper succession is no easy task. The CEOs, the executives, and the team leaders and all the managers, they all should be involved in the process of succession planning and implementation. And what I feel is that assessment and selection would be most important. Assessment, how to assess potential, was discussed during the earlier presentation, and based on my experience, potential assessment is very, very difficult. So what we do is we leadership assessment and then value assessment, whether the value of the individuals match those of the company. So this is the annual assessment that we conduct. So leadership, innovation, and all of these assessments are put together for a comprehensive assessment job. And yet the result of our assessment work is not very effective. So the person in charge of HR meets the different sector heads to discuss on the potential talents, on what direction these people should be taking, how they should be fostered. They should be continued. I think the only work that we can do is continued discussion on this matter. So having a succession plan, and we have to come up with a list with those who are already ready, those who will be ready within 2-3 years. And we have that list. However, when we implement that during actual implementation based on this list, it's not very effective more often than not. So there should be continuous discussion with the section chief, the team leaders, and to discuss on the status of the individual and how we're going to foster these individuals. And the best way to foster the talent potential is to expose them to new experiences and continue to provide them with new training. So provide them with new tasks, new challenges, new projects, and when needed, post them overseas. So phase by phase, so when they're in the director level, director general level, or manager level, or higher levels, expose these individuals to experiences that suits the level that he or she is at the moment. So those were some of the conclusions that we could derive from POSCO's own experience. Because of time limit, I won't really go into details of what my company does, and I'll end with that. Thank you. One of my roles as moderator is to make sure that we're in time. And right now we have only about 5 minutes, but since we started slightly late, I think that we can take about 10 minutes for further discussions. Are there any questions from the floor or any comments from the floor? And if you do, please introduce yourself briefly. Is the mic ready? I would like to ask my question in English. I'm Eugene Won, and I am a leader of many business units. I would like to ask my question to Mr. Jongtae Choi. It's 2, 1. Currently, I am wondering has to do with your current talent management methodologies right now. And my second question has to do with Samsung, LG, and large conglomerates, but also I have heard from many of the CEOs of the SMEs about many talents not really fully unleashing their potential in such organizations. So I was wondering, do you have any comments on that? As you know, we are in an age society, and if you're about 55 of age, many of them just retire, although they are talents. So I was wondering how we can really take full advantage of such talent, such age talent pool is very important. So I would like to ask your comments on that. We'll accept a few more questions before listening to the answers from the presenters. So while you're thinking, why don't we listen to the answer from Mr. Choi Jong-tae first? In the case of POSCO, I think we do management through two ways. One, we have leaders. Other, we have professionals. So in our overall assessment, if they have high level of expertise, they are promoted. And we have people who have gone up to the executive level. So they're team leaders and yet they're an executive at the same time. So that's one system that we follow. So the leaders continue to go up the corporate ladder, and every year our talents are analyzed and assessed through the HR session between the senior executive vice president for HR and the team leaders or section chiefs. There is a continuous assessment of the potential talents. So there is continuous challenge given to these individuals, and they're given new tasks. So that's our way of fostering our future talents. So we have a good pool of talents, and succession takes place by selecting from this talent pool. But when it comes to globalizing, when we have a new business area, we lack number of talents that could fill positions in these global businesses. So if there are former CEOs who are still able to work, who are still healthy, then they could be utilized in our global businesses in the future. I think that's one option that we have.
Today, I got a question to Richard. My name is In-ho. I'm working at Korean IT conglomerate as a talent recruitment and retention organizer. And you explained about like succession plan in global company at 3 steps, right? And as a first step, you told me to identify critical role, and you showed a very interesting chart, the critical workforce segment. So I got a question. Who should be in charge of the set that CWS, and what kind of process is being made to set that key position? The reason why I'm asking is nowadays is digital era, so the key position is changing very fast. And do you think the organization or person who is in charge of the set CWS, is it inside a company or like contemporary, like outside a consulting company?
Our point of view, our experience is that most organizations do not focus on critical workforce segments, that most focus just on hierarchical positions within an organization, in particular the C-suite or business unit leaders. Our recommendation is that you dissect your business and understand which groups of employees, irrespective of level within the organization, are most important to your value proposition. Now, who should do that? I think an external consultant can help facilitate that, can advise that on you, but you have to do it. You being a partnership between HR and the line management of the business. I think that they jointly should understand who are our most important groups of employees given where we are in the marketplace, and then develop programs that are tailored to them. one of the things that Jack Welch talked about this morning was the importance of differentiation, more differentiation. I think that most organizations have applied a peanut butter. That's probably not a good analogy in this part of the world, but I'm not sure what a good analogy would be, but just a uniform approach, a one-size-fits-all approach to all employees in terms of learning and development and advancement. And we think that's not optimal. We think it's best to understand who are your most critical workforce segments and then tailor programs for each of those segments. Again, not just the executive ranks. Does that answer the question?
시간이 이제 거의 다 됐기 때문에 마무리.
I think it's time for us to conclude now. We've listened to 3 presentations, and as the professor teaching HR, I feel like I need to revise some textbooks that I've written so far. When we talk about the HR, we usually talk from an executive level, but it seems the new paradigm, the new theory is that this needs to be an approach from entire company perspectives, and Korea is lagging behind in this effort. Programs like Korea development programs are in place, but in particular with regards to succession planning, there are still many areas that we lack and we need to develop further, particularly for global companies to have successful succession planning. It should be an integrated HR system in place, and in particular there needs to be capacity building, capacity development to develop the potential of the talents. I think that's an important message that we could derive from today's session. I'd like to thank the 3 presenters for such wonderful presentations. A round of applause to you all.